Hi everybody, my name is Green Leader, and this is Green Squadron Games. And last week we got some sad news coming out of the games industry. Volition Games, known primarily for the Saints Row franchise and Red Faction franchise, was suddenly closed down on August 31st. And I wanted to talk about what I believe led to their closure and what that closure potentially means for other developers who have been bought out by large publishing groups like Embracer Group. So on August 31st, on Volition's website, they put out a statement that reads as follows. The Volition team has proudly created world-class entertainment for fans around the globe for 30 years. We've been driven by a passion for our community and always worked to deliver joy, surprise, and delight. This past June, Embracer Group announced a restructuring program to strengthen Embracer and maintain its position as a leader in the video game industry. As a part of that program, they evaluated strategic and operational goals and made the difficult decision to close Volition effective immediately. To help our team, we are working to provide job assistance and help the smooth transition of our Volition family members. We thank our customers and fans around the world for all the love and support over the years. You'll always be in our hearts, Volition Games. Kind of a sad statement there. Clearly, decision seems to not have been made by them, but clearly by their new parent company, Embracer Group, who I believe bought them several years ago before they started working on the Saints Row reboot. The next day, on September 1st, Volition also posted a letter to the community on their Twitter page. And I'm not going to read the entirety of the thing, but it's essentially a lot more the same of what we'd already heard, talking more about how they loved working as a family, they worked hard together, and unfortunately things didn't work out. They cared about their fans, and the fans were the reason, according to them, why they made games. Now, my only issue is that I wonder about that, considering how their last game that they made, the Saints Row reboot from last year, and how divisive it actually was to their fan base. As many of you are probably aware, the Saints Row game released last year, and when it was released, it was a buggy mess. It had all sorts of problems with missions failing, saves being corrupted, random physics, which, to be fair, random physics is always kind of entertaining, but beside the point, game crashes and things like that, game-breaking bugs that essentially made the game unplayable for many. On top of that, mixed with a story that decided to delve into the political realm, pushing some of those politics. And while granted, I don't think it was an overt part of the game, because I know there's a lot more freedom later on in the campaign to just sort of do whatever you want and not have to worry about that. It is still the fact that some of that stuff is pushed into the game. Very understandable how that could be very divisive to a bunch of the fan base for Volition. And we see that in the Metacritic scores, not only from users, but also from critics as well. This CU received generally mixed reviews from critics, for the PC version getting only 65 on average, with a user score of 2.5, PlayStation getting only 61 and a 2.9 user score, and on Xbox Series X getting only a 65 Metacritic score with a 2.9 user score again. This game was clearly divisive to their fans, and as a result, it didn't get as many sales as Embracer Group would have liked, and underperformed for them as a publishing and distribution company, resulting in them deciding to close down Volition. But I think there's more to Embracer Group's decision to shut down Volition than just Saints Row not doing well. As we see here from GameIndustry.biz, a couple months ago, Embracer had a giant deal fall through that would have exceeded $2 billion, and it quote-unquote collapsed due to external factors. And according to the CEO, it's nothing to do with the commercial terms, he said. They were already agreed and everything was done and ready to go. And the feedback, there is strong belief in the deal on both sides. So the decision is external factors from this transaction. Now, what these external factors are, he never really elaborates, and we don't actually know who the other party of this deal was. But knowing that this $2 billion deal failed to go through, we know that essentially this forced Embracer to change their structuring process to try and cut costs, because this deal was ultimately meant to act as catch-up. As he says here, this deal would have enabled a catch-up payment at closing for already capitalized cost for a range of large-budgeted games, I'm sure Saints Row being one of them. It would have also notably improved Embracer's profits in the medium and long term, as well as its cash flow predictably during these contracted development projects. So reading that, it seems to me that Embracer essentially had gotten into the hole trying to fund games like Saints Row and some of the other games that were already under their control. And this was as a means to sort of get back some of the profits from that without actually relying on the games to sell well enough. It's essentially seems like a money management sort of shell game in which they are trying to fix some of their losses with a new deal that's coming in, which seems to me a little bit like a Ponzi scheme. Granted, I don't think it's a legitimate Ponzi scheme, but it does seem like you're dealing with that sort of financial mismanagement, if you will. And because of that, they decide that they're going to end up restructuring and ultimately shutting down certain studios, and in this case, it happened to be Volition. I think the other concern to take into account is what does this actually mean for other developers who have allowed themselves to be bought out by bigger publishers, like Bethesda with Microsoft, or Bungie with Sony, or a whole host of other smaller independent studios that were bought out by Microsoft, Sony, EA, Nintendo, and so on. While these deals may seem like a good idea and would allow the studio to have a safety net of a larger parent company providing you with some sort of financial backing, that does also mean that you need to deliver on whatever game you provide them. And if that game underperforms financially or even does well, that still may not be enough for them to continue to support you, and they could remove that safety net at any time. We've seen this in the past before with other studios. Not only have we now just seen Volition being the latest example of that, but we've seen that with Westward Studios, the studio that was behind Command & Conquer series. We've seen it with Pandemic Studios, the studio that was behind the original Star Wars Battlefront series. We've seen it with Ensemble Studios, who did Age of Empires and Halo Wars, and despite those games doing well, were still shut down. We've also seen this with Lionhead Studios, who was responsible for the Fable series. Now granted, to be fair, in a couple of these examples, we have seen that these studios had a falling off in terms of quality for these games, like with Pandemic Studios and Lionhead Studios. So you could essentially argue in their cases, maybe that is partially their fault, but what about Ensemble Studios, who was shut down despite good sales regardless? You still have that issue of a parent company deciding maybe that investment really isn't worth it anymore, and so we can either shut you down and then still own the IP and potentially give that IP to some other studio, in which case now the original studio loses all rights to their own creation. But what do you guys think? Do you think that Volition was shut down appropriately, considering the Saints Row reboot was such a disaster? Or do you think that Volition deserved another chance, and that Embracer Group essentially jumped the gun because of their own financial mismanagement of the other studios that they had gone around acquiring? And what do you think of these other studios that have been bought up by large publishers? Do you think Bethesda or Bungie or any of these other studios are going to run afoul of the same issue that Volition did? I'd love to hear what you guys think. But if you guys have made it this far into the video, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing if you've enjoyed the content. And until next time, this is Green Leader, signing out.